In a constantly changing world, today is as simple as it gets. You're listening to the Leadership Enigma, a podcast to explore, experiment, and power up your leadership to make the difference to your business, your people, and your success. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or corporate executive, each week we dig deep into global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts, and disruptors. Now, here's your host, Adam Pacifico.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Enigma. And I'm delighted that I have Beth Miller with me all the way from Atlanta, USA. Beth, how are you?
I am doing fine, and it's hot Atlanta today. It's very, very warm.
Hot Atlanta, and I know that you had a terrific storm only yesterday.
We did, but thankfully it's a very calm day, so we should stay connected.
So the weather gods are with us, at least for this episode.
Yes.
Now, I'm delighted that Beth is with us. Now, Beth is a talent management advisor. She really helps people develop leadership pipelines. And that's something that I'm extremely interested in, because this episode we're talking about is called Get Out of the Way, because sometimes leaders need to just get out of the way. Am I right in that?
Oh my gosh, yes.
And I think people struggle with it.
Yeah. Especially business owners. I work with a lot of small, medium-sized businesses, and generally the founder, CEO, is still very involved. And the challenge is that many of them are aging, and within the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to want to retire. Well, they need to figure out how to get out of the way and let other people start taking on their responsibilities. So when the time comes, there's not this rush of trying to develop people and getting people up to speed.
Yes.
In order for the business owner to be able to retire or exit or whatever.
Avoid the panic of exit. That's true.
Yeah.
Now, you're also the author of Are You Talent Obsessed? So my first question is, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get to this point working with leaders on this topic?
Yeah, it wasn't a straight path. I actually started in finance and worked for a Fortune 500 company for the first 7 years of my career back in the 80s. And I realized pretty quickly into my financial career that although I was good at it, I wasn't passionate about it.
Right.
It just wasn't something that I really enjoyed doing. And fortunately, the company I was working for at the time had an internal training program for sales.
Right.
So I moved into sales, and that's actually how I got to Atlanta, Georgia. I'm originally from the Boston area. And the sales opportunity was great. The experience, though, my final experience at that company taught me a really good lesson around talent, and that is that people leave managers, not companies.
So true.
Yeah. And I just had a really bad manager, and I didn't have a real option to transfer and stay in Atlanta. And I wanted to stay in Atlanta. So my only option was to leave the company.
It's so true, isn't it? How a good leader, or indeed a bad leader, can have such a massive impact on someone, either positive or negative. And unfortunately, in this instance, you're talking about it was negative, but perhaps that was a good thing, because it spurred you on to helping others in relation to this aspect.
Yeah. What in between the work I was doing there and then the work I'm doing now, which I started back in 2006, my husband and I ran a consulting technology practice.
Right.
And he actually started it, and he convinced me to leave the company I was working for at the time and help him grow the business. So we grew it to an Inc. 5000, or actually Inc. 500 company.
Wow.
Back then it was only 500. Now it's 5,000.
Okay. You were ahead of your time, Beth, anyway.
I was. And we grew it and then sold it back in 2003. I took some time off, and another lesson learned, I'm not somebody to retire. There's just not enough golf and beach time. And I did a lot of volunteer work as well, which was rewarding, but not enough. So I found Vistage, which is a CEO membership organization. I believe there are chapters in the UK as well.
I think so, yes.
And I chaired several groups from 2006 through early last year. And while I was doing that, I was also had my executive velocity work. So I was helping companies to assess future leaders, assess potential employees, develop and coach leaders and rising leaders. And back last year, I decided that I was busy enough that I really needed to step down from Vistage. So it was actually perfect because one of the members of my group ended up taking over the group.
Right.
So I had my mini succession plan in place.
Well, which is the actual subject of this episode. So
Yeah.
you always had a focus on helping people manage talent.
Mm-hmm.
You've taken lessons from your own experiences and your own journey within the workplace. But help our listeners understand. So what's the challenge with succession planning? And then we'll move on to some of your top tips.
Well, I think the first challenge is the business owner leader, because the business is their baby.
Yep.
They have, they've birthed it, they've nurtured it, they've gotten to a certain point, and letting go is very difficult. Partially because they don't have a vision for where they're going to be in the future.
Right. What
are they going to do after they leave the company? So some of my work is spent with leaders defining that. What is it going to look like afterwards? Now, some of them are clearly very happy working into their 70s. That's their gig. But there are others that are thinking about retirement. In fact, I just spoke to one yesterday, and he's like, "I'm 60 years old, Beth, and I got to make sure that I have the right people in place before I leave," because he said, I don't want to sell this. I want this. I want to sell to my employees. That was
a legacy, Beth.
Yeah, that was his legacy. Yeah.
Right.
Other business owners, that's not their vision. Their vision is to sell to an outside party and exit. But the leader is probably the first roadblock. Okay. Getting them to understand, what the future looks like for them without their business. The other is that leader who is a control freak and has identified somebody, either internally or externally, that is going to be their successor. Mm-hmm. They can't keep their fingers out of the pie. And they're always...
We all know someone like that, don't we, Beth?
Yes, yes. And they're always, inserting themselves in decisions that really their successor should be making.
Disempowering that person. Almost.
Right. Yeah, very much so. And I have seen successors end up leaving a company because they just get so frustrated. It's like, you gave me this position, but you're not empowering me at all to do what you've told me I need to be doing.
I think this is a fascinating subject, just in the focus on founders. And I know lots has been written, and Harvard Business Review have talked about this, about the inability of those founders to get out of the way, because almost their entire personality is wrapped up in their business.
Oh, yeah.
And then sometimes third-party investors come in, and the first thing they do is they put a CEO in who's not the founder, to their horror.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. I work a lot on the founder syndrome, and helping individuals get past that. Now there are others who will have kind of that aha moment. It might be a personal situation. I remember working with one gentleman who found out that he had some health issues.
Right.
And so gee, how much longer do I have?
Wow.
So that, there was a motivator there behind him creating a succession plan, because he realized he had limited time.
Okay. You'd rather not have to wait till something like
No,
that happens, would you,
exactly.
until the light bulb switches on?
Right.
Okay. All right. What are some of the other roadblocks or
Well,
categories you come across?
the next one I find is people don't know how to start the process
Okay.
and the components to the process. They'll oftentimes have missing components from an infrastructure standpoint that they need to have in place before they even go through a succession plan, such as a development planning process, a career pathing process. They need to understand what their core competencies are, and core competencies are a key component, not just to succession planning in developing your talent pool, but when you know your core competencies, you can integrate that knowledge into the hiring process.
Right.
You can create good questions that will uncover applicants' competencies and whether or not they fit with your core competencies. So that's one missing piece that I find a lot. The other big missing piece is understanding what potential is versus performance. A lot of companies get confused with high performers and high potentials.
Okay.
And they don't equate. And that's generally what I find is they have a high performer in some subject matter expert in engineering or design, something that's a craft, and that person is really good at that craft. And the leader decides, hey, you know what? We should promote them into a leadership position.
Right.
They're so good at what they do. Well, leading and doing are two entirely different skill sets.
Now, forgive me, Beth, this is really resonating with me, and I'm feverishly making some notes here as well. That's interesting about how, and I've seen lots of examples as a lawyer in maybe international law firms where first-rate lawyers, doesn't always have to be a lawyer, first-rate somebody is elevated into a leadership position, and they are very second, or dare I say, third-rate.
Yes.
Now, after 25 years of success, Beth, they're starting to fail.
Yeah.
So have you seen that as well?
Oh, I see that. I see it sooner than 20 to 25 years.
Right.
I had a situation recently, another, smaller business, probably maybe 40 employees. And the owner called me. She was really concerned. She had just elevated a programmer,
yes,
technical person, to a management position. And within several weeks, she was having some issues with his performance as a leader. Well, I said, well, how did you make this decision? And gosh, come to find out, she made the decision because the guy had gotten an offer from another company.
Right.
And so she countered it with, well, I'll make you into a leadership position. Will you stay? And I'm like, oh my God, seriously?
That's now like shoving a square peg in a round hole, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So she was calling me saying, Beth, can you coach him? And I was like, well, let's do a little analysis first. And there are definitely some things that he is coachable on that will help him, like delegation, for instance. He never understood how to delegate, and how to identify who to delegate to, and following up and all that. So so those are some of the things that I'm working with him on.
Probably been a great individual contributor, but now needed to shift across. You also mentioned something else which I want to pick up on, and that was, do you find that some founders, and I'm going back to the founders who are passionate, they're wrapped up in their business, that when they tend to think about succession planning, they end up hiring in their own image?
Oh gosh, yes. And that,
which may not be what they need at all.
No, not at all, because the company is a different company than when the company was formed by that leader.
Yes. Yeah.
There are, the strategy's probably changed. The environment has probably changed, and they need to have somebody who is going to move their strategic plan forward, and that doesn't mean somebody that's just like them. Yeah.
So this is a classic, what got you here may not get you there.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So don't hire in your own image because you need a new person. And perhaps that's why so many founders are offended when third-party investors bring in their own management.
Right.
Maybe.
And I see that go even further. I'm working with a company who has built a staffing company. And one of the things that I've done with his team is assess them for their personality and behavioral styles.
Right.
And they're all, except for one, all a bunch of spontaneous folks. There's no planned aspect to their team. And this one person who is planned feels like a fish out of water.
Right.
And he is getting ready to hire an additional person on the executive team. I'm like, you have got to find somebody who's planned. They've got to have that one competency that will help round out your team. And he agrees. I mean, it's like, yeah, I've got to have somebody.
Well, it's a real challenge, isn't it? Because how do founders go about working out what are the competencies that the business needs now, as opposed to the competencies that they think the business needed then? Or they look at themselves and think, well, I founded it, so maybe it's a me.
Right. So there's a process that I use, and I start with the company's values.
Right.
But what are the values the company has? And oftentimes with smaller companies, they've got values, but they haven't really uncovered the behaviors that they're looking for that support those values.
Right.
So oftentimes that's the first step is I have a facilitated session with their leadership team, and we define what are those behaviors that support those values. Like, for instance, integrity. Well,
yes.
Okay.
What does it mean?
Right.
It's a word on a page,
broad.
right?
Right. It's broad. Integrity to me might mean something different to you. So what are those behaviors? Like, do what I say I'm going to do. Okay. Not talking behind people's back. Being transparent and open. Those kinds of things.
So Beth, in some ways it's working out, and this is relevant to the big companies too, what are the behaviors that support, and also what are the behaviors that undermine the very value that they're talking about? Yeah,
exactly.
Okay. Gotcha.
And so then, a competency is basically a broad set of knowledge, skills, and behaviors. So a competency could be like communications. Well, communications is really broad. What are the specific behaviors that may be coming from the values, and skills and knowledge that would round out a competency?
So in some ways, you're creating a route map for them to really identify what it is that they need to make their business thrive going forward.
Right. And those core competencies are competencies that all employees should have. And that's why you want to integrate those competencies into the hiring process.
Okay.
So that you're bringing people on who align with your values through competencies.
So if a leader or owner of a business is thinking about succession planning, what's the lead time that you'd recommend for them to really be thinking and actioning this to be successful?
Okay, so if we define succession planning as just the owner, I would say probably 3 years.
Okay.
But I look at succession planning more as an organizational process.
Or rhythm.
Right.
Okay.
That it should occur when you are doing your business plans. It is one of the supporting plans to a business plan.
Gotcha. Okay. So what would be some of your top tips or best advice then to an owner of a small, medium business, or even a large business, really, when it talks, someone working in a global multinational, and they're thinking, I need to move on and let somebody else come in and take this division forward.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think first of all is getting to that decision, right?
Yeah.
Right. That, a lot of people aren't ready to move on. Gosh, if I start developing these people below me that ultimately could take my position, which is really what a leader is. A leader is developing future leaders.
Yes.
That's really my definition. And, many of them have the confidence and ego to do that. But there will be ones that, aren't as self-confident in their own role.
Yep.
That, it's a threat to them in developing somebody that could potentially take their position on. Right. If the company has been just growing on a steady, 5% rate, well, and here you're developing, you've identified somebody as a successor. Well, if you get that person to the point where they can take on your position, but there's no place for you to go, that can cause a problem.
Right. Okay.
So you've got to be really clear when you're communicating to the individual. You've identified this person as a high potential that can take on additional roles and responsibilities, that, there's no guarantee, but that you're investing in them. You want to develop them. And, it may be longer to get to that next position, but meanwhile, you want to expand their role within their current job.
Yep.
You're creating diverse projects and allowing them to grow within their current role.
But as you say, one of the tricky considerations is, if a leader is doing that, have they themselves worked out where they're going and why?
They need to know that there's obviously a place for them in the future. And if they're developing that person below them, they need to be really clear on the fact that they want to develop that person. They're investing time and money in developing them. The idea that they're going to have a promotion in a certain time frame may not be realistic. What you do is you enrich their job. You add additional components to their job.
Yes.
And allow them maybe to offload other components that might not be as value added to people, either across the organization or down.
So developing them with a view.
Yeah.
Because we can't be certain of the future, as a global pandemic has shown us. We never really know what's going on around the corner.
No, and I will tell you that if we think about the Generation Y, they are demanding development. Some of them are more goal-oriented than others, about rising through the organization. But they want to learn, and they want to get feedback on how they're doing through that process.
Okay. So Beth, I mean, this is a fascinating subject, which I think should be at the forefront of any founder, leader's mind, really. And I know we spoke about this before we even did the podcast. How can people reach you, or what are you up to now that's helpful for some of the listeners in relation to getting out of the way? Because I'm sure there's lots of people thinking, I need to think about getting out of the way.
So I'm actually in the process of writing a book on succession planning for small to mid-sized companies. It's in the early stages. I'm hoping to get the final draft done by the end of this year. So it won't be out until 2021.
Okay.
So that's a lot of my time in between coaching and developing leaders. I'm writing the book.
Okay. But how can people reach you then if they want to reach out to you in the interim?
Well, a couple of ways. One is through LinkedIn. You can find me at Beth Arm Connect Miller. Arm Connect's my maiden name, and it's spelled ARMConnect Knecht. So Beth Armknecht Miller.
Gotcha.
There's only one of me on LinkedIn. So
well, that's always useful.
Yeah,
well, it means you're unique, Beth. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, good.
And then my website, which is executive-velocity.com. I have a lot of free resources out there that visitors can download.
Great. So that's www.executive-velocity.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's absolutely great. And Beth, I know we're coming to the end of our time, and I'm going to ask you some strange questions, which you don't have any notice of, but I've asked lots of people these. So This should be some fun. So here we go. Simple one to start with. So what's your hobby, Beth? Now, this might be, lockdown hobby, or this might be a hobby that has carried you through lockdown. I don't know.
Wow. Okay. So normally my hobby is travel.
Okay.
Oh, clearly that's not happening. Right? So my new hobby, which has taught me a lot of patience, is baking bread.
Baking bread. Okay.
But here's the kicker: sourdough bread.
I was going to ask.
Yes,
Sourdough.
I started my own starter, which took on the internet. It says you can get a starter going in 5 days. It took me 3 weeks.
Okay.
No lie.
That's a hell of a hobby, right?
Yes, but now every Saturday morning we have fresh sourdough bread.
Which is very nice, I can imagine. Okay, second one is, and as you've written and you're about to continue writing as well, what's your favorite word?
Oh, wow.
That's a good one, right?
Oh, I've never been asked that question.
Well, I'm putting you on the spot, I know, but that's the fun of the podcast, isn't it? What's front of mind for you? Your favorite word?
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Well, I can't really argue with that, can I? As a Brit, we're talking about Mary Poppins, right? So we love that. And then my final question to you is, what would be your best piece of advice to a 21-year-old Beth?
Oh, follow your passion.
Can't argue with that either, really. Follow your passion. Beth, it's been great. Thank you so much for taking time to chat to me on the Leadership Enigma.
I've enjoyed it so much, Dan.
People now know and understand the importance of getting out of the way.
Join us again next week for more essential insights on the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show, as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with your host on LinkedIn or via our website, www.pca-global.com. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes. Thanks for listening.